Imagine the Ides of March, 44 BCE. The air in the Roman Senate house is thick with tension, a murmur of anticipation. Then a sudden flurry of movement, the flash of daggers, and Julius Caesar, the most powerful man in Rome, falls bleeding at the foot of Pompey's statue. For the conspirators, led by men like Brutus and Cassius, this wasn't an act of murder. It was a desperate, sacred duty. A surgical strike meant to excise the perceived cancer of tyranny and restore the ailing Roman Republic to its former glory. They believed that by removing Caesar, they would instantly release Rome from the grip of a dictator and usher in a new era of freedom and senatorial rule. But oh, how tragically wrong they were. Far from saving the Republic, this single, brutal act plunged Rome into an even deeper abyss of civil strife, ultimately paving the way for an empire, forever burying the very system they sought to protect. The Roman Republic, before Caesar's fateful end, was already a venerable but deeply fractured institution. Born from the overthrow of kings centuries earlier, it was built on principles of shared power, annual magistracies, and the ultimate authority of the Senate and the Roman people. Yet by the 1st century BCE, the Republic was groaning under the weight of its own success and the ambitions of powerful individuals. Vast wealth, military might, and political corruption had created an environment where personal loyalties often trumped civic duty. Caesar, a brilliant general and politician, had capitalized on this instability, leveraging his military victories in Gaul, his populist appeal, and a series of audacious political maneuvers to accumulate unprecedented power. He had effectively become dictator for life, centralizing authority and implementing reforms that, while often beneficial to the common people, deeply offended the aristocratic sensibilities of the Senate and threatened their traditional influence. The conspirators, steeped in Republican ideology and fearing permanent subjugation to one man, saw Caesar's continued existence as an existential threat to Rome's foundational values. Their intent was clear: eliminate the tyrant and the Republic would naturally reassert itself. The immediate aftermath of the assassination, however, painted a very different picture. Instead of widespread celebration, Rome descended into chaos and confusion. The conspirators, having made their bloody statement, fled to the Capitoline Hill, expecting a grateful populace to rally to their cause. But the citizens, many of whom had benefited from Caesar's policies and genuinely admired him, were bewildered and angry. Mark Antony, Caesar's trusted right-hand man and consul, quickly seized the initiative. Through a masterful display of political cunning, he delivered a fiery eulogy at Caesar's public funeral, dramatically presenting Caesar's will and displaying his blood-stained toga to the furious crowd. This inflamed public opinion against the assassins, turning them from perceived liberators into reviled murderers, forcing them to flee Italy for their lives. The power vacuum left by Caesar's death was not filled by a resurgent republic, but by a volatile struggle for dominance, with Antony initially emerging as the strongest contender. However, a new and unexpected player soon arrived on the scene: Gaius Octavius, Caesar's adopted great-nephew, named as his primary heir in his will. Though young and initially underestimated, Octavian, as he became known, possessed an extraordinary political acumen and an unshakable determination. He skillfully leveraged Caesar's immense popularity, his own inherited wealth, and the legions loyal to his adoptive father's name. This set him on an inevitable collision course with Antony, sparking another round of bloody civil conflict. Realizing the strength of their respective positions, Octavian eventually allied with Antony and another powerful general, Lepidus, forming the Second Triumvirate. This alliance, officially sanctioned by law, was a blatant rejection of republican principles. It ruthlessly consolidated power, systematically eliminated political enemies, through brutal proscriptions, essentially legalized murder lists, and divided the Roman world between them. The very notion of senatorial authority and individual liberties, cornerstones of the Republic, was completely trampled underfoot. The Republic truly met its demise through a convergence of tragic factors that the conspirators utterly failed to comprehend. Firstly, by eliminating Caesar, they didn't remove the cause of Rome's instability. They removed its most powerful stabilizer, albeit a dictatorial one. Caesar had, for a time, imposed order on a chaotic system. His death created a vacuum that immediately drew in multiple ambitious warlords, each with their own armies and claims to legitimacy. Secondly, the act of assassination itself legitimized violence as the ultimate arbiter of political power. If a dictator could be removed by force, then any political opponent could be, too. This set a dangerous precedent, fueling a cycle of revenge and ambition that consumed the next 13 years in relentless civil wars. The institutional mechanisms of the Republic elections, debates, consensus building, were simply incapable of resolving these conflicts. Instead, military might become the only language understood, and the Republic lacked the robust structures or a unifying figure to withstand such pressures. Moreover, the conspirators failed to gauge public sentiment. Caesar, despite his autocratic tendencies, was beloved by many, and his death was seen not as liberation, but as a treacherous murder. This public outrage provided fertile ground for ambitious figures like Antony and Octavian to cultivate their own power bases under the banner of avenging Caesar. Looking back, the conspirators made several critical miscalculations. Their primary error was assuming that removing a dictator would automatically restore a complex political system that was already fundamentally broken. They lacked a clear, unified plan for what came next beyond Caesar's death. There was no established, credible Republican government waiting in the wings, nor was there a consensus among the conspirators themselves about the future direction of Rome. Furthermore, they drastically underestimated the power of Caesar's legacy and his popularity among the common people and the legions. They saw Caesar as a personal tyrant, but many Romans saw him as a benefactor and a strong leader in turbulent times. Their act of violence, intended to be a surgical strike, instead ripped open deeper wounds, exposing the Republic's profound structural weaknesses and creating an environment where only those with overwhelming military force could hope to prevail. The era of powerful individual generals commanding loyal armies had long superseded the fragile authority of the Senate. In the end, the noble, yet ultimately naive, aspiration of the conspirators backfired spectacularly. Their daggers, aimed at a single man in the name of liberty, instead became the instruments that hammered the final nails into the coffin of the Roman Republic. The brutal civil wars that followed Caesar's assassination, culminating in Octavian's victory at Actium and his subsequent transformation into the Emperor Augustus, marked a definitive end to the Republican experiment. The very act meant to preserve freedom ironically extinguished it, giving birth to a new political order, the Roman Empire, which would dominate the Western world for centuries. It's a powerful and enduring lesson from history that even acts intended for the highest ideals can, if miscalculated and poorly executed within a fragile system, lead to consequences far more dire and unintended than their perpetrators could ever have imagined. The ghost of Caesar, far from being banished, paved the way for his successors to truly consolidate power in ways the Republic could never resist.